Why is it that America is the sickest developed nation in the world, as we've been called for quite a while now, because of the statistics that are actually telling the story? Is there anything in particular? Is there any one or combination of foods that we should be avoiding, or is there certain foods that we're not eating, or there seems to be a disconnect here that I don't think is as complex as we all think it is, but perhaps through some societal conditioning we've arrived at this place where we're still one of the most affluent nations, and we're also the sickest one. Well, it kind of doesn't make sense. You would think if we have advanced technology and infrastructure and education, we should be perhaps one of the healthiest nations in the world. What's going on?
Well, Earl Butz, who was Secretary of Agriculture under Richard Nixon, was directed to drop the quality of our food supply, so Nixon was more likely to get elected in '72. What was happening at the time was a situation known as stagflation, which was stagnation of wages and inflation at the same time. That's why they call it stagflation. And Nixon was very concerned. In fact, that was the whole business with Whitewater, or Watergate rather. So that's kind of where it started. And then it was followed up with McGovern, who lost the presidency, who had his congressional hearing, which they wanted simple answers to complex questions, and they came out against fat. Because it's a very logical approach to avoid fat. You stay away from fat, except it happens to be wrong.
And this was what? This directive against fat was...
Well, it started, in the 70s.
Okay.
With McGovern, the presidential candidate, and Richard Nixon. And it was one of the few things they agreed on. Earl Butz, who is one of the most disgusting human beings God ever created, for a lot of other sexist and racist reasons, and you could read more about him online, was directed to drop the quality of our food supply.
In order to bring it to a more affordable price level.
Right.
Okay.
And that's exactly what
to keep the masses happy. So,
yes.
More or less. Okay, so what does that mean for a society when or our society when that occurred? Yeah. There was some kind of a catalyst, I'm sure, that kind of led us to where we are.
Well, all
today.
The dominoes dropped in line at that point.
Right. Okay. And you and I just heard this part of an infomercial that was selling this package on how to get people healthy, and there was actually a propaganda campaign to demonize fats because there was starting to be some focus on the potential that sugar might be causing a lot of our health problems, and that was done in the 60s.
Yes. Right?
So to divert attention away from sugar, what were they, Harvard?
It was a couple of Harvard researchers. That particular infomercial was talking about just two of them.
Right, but that research got into the medical journals.
Yes, it got into the New England Journal of Medicine.
Right, so at that point it became law.
Well, it became...
Well, doctors bought
literacy,
into it.
Yes.
Right?
It became common... Right. You're right, it did become law.
And who were patients listening to? More so back then than now was their doctors, yes. their GPs. And
actually, in some ways, it is law because you have to practice usual, customary, and reasonable standards, or you can get sued. Usual, customary, and reasonable standards are set by your opinion leaders, and those are the opinion leaders, including these two Harvard researchers that sold out.
Okay.
That got money from organized sugar. But it even predates that to a certain extent. The head of Harvard's nutrition department took money from General Foods, which owned Domino Sugar, to pay for it.
Interesting.
That paid for the building at Harvard. It was worth a few $1 million back then. And then when Gene Mayer became president of Tufts, it was the Tufts Nutritional newsletter, which is kind of where I became aware of him.
Wow.
But they all sold out.
Yeah.
Mayer took the position, and he was a.
They sold us out.
They sold us out. He was a World War II hero in a lot of ways.
So they're direct. Actually, I want to really put this into perspective. They're responsible for the 20 million or so children that are diabetic
and obese
every year. Yeah, yeah, children.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not 20 million new ones, but it's total.
Or we're hovering around that 20 million. That's the last figure I heard. Okay. So we have, let's say, somewhere around 20 million diabetic children in this country,
or possibly pre-diabetic.
Pre-diabetic, but we didn't have that 35, 40 years ago. What changed?
Well, it was the combination. It was Earl Butz doing his thing under Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon didn't turn around and say, "Let's make everybody fat." He was just an efficient politician to get elected and drop the amount of money the average American was spending on food. And by the way, Butz's initiative was so successful to this day, the United States spends less per capita of our yearly income on food than any other nation in the world. Now, unfortunately, we spend the most on medical care. And I always say, well, who would you rather pay, your farmer or your doctor? I get my stuff from the Amish because I'd rather pay my farmer. And I pay more than you'd pay at a grocery store, but I get real food.
Absolutely.
That has concentrated nutrients. So let's just follow up. So Nixon does this with Butz. And the senator from North Dakota who lost to Nixon runs his nutritional program in Washington, and they want simple answers from. And they got it, that fat causes fat, which it actually doesn't.
Well, I learned somewhere along the line. I mean, I've done my own research. I had to, save my own health at one point. And I read that every cell in your body requires fat and cholesterol. So why were we demonizing it? I mean, it was part of a propaganda campaign, but it makes zero sense.
We demonize it because we imagine that atherosclerotic plaques have some cholesterol in it.
Some
cholesterol. It's not even the majority. Majority actually is polyunsaturated fatty acids, but that's a story for another day.
And what was the other? Calcium.
And calcium is a cap.
Okay.
But it's very easy to imagine you eat fat or cholesterol, and it causes the atherosclerotic plaque.
Because it's a perfect fairy tale.
It's linear. And as in many other things in life that are very complicated, but when you get a simple solution to, it's wrong. And they were dead wrong. And unfortunately, a lot of the dead people are us. I just had a patient die last night.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Who, unfortunately, I never got his sugar under control. But here's the dominoes that were lined up in a row to assure this fairy tale took hold. We first had the people from Harvard, which were the best academics money could buy. And you could read the article in the Journal American Medical Association. We have the Department of Agriculture, which came in with the food pyramid, which I refer to as the Damocles sword aimed at the heart of the American people, which I think is much more accurate. We had the FDA,
and blunt,
who bought into it. A lot of it with the work of Morris Fishbein, who's, when the history of this is written, who's still, by the way, celebrated in the American Medical Association, who's one of the biggest crooks
It's
that God ever created. Used to take the train once a week and had a regular table at New York's swankiest nightclub, which probably very few of the readers would know of, called the Copa.
Yeah.
but it has regular table. But you literally take the train every week.
Yeah.
That's the sort of wealth we're talking about, from getting paid off from General Mills and getting paid off from the cereal companies, and I might add, getting paid off from the cigarette companies. More doctors smoke Camels, he made famous.
Right, right.
And for a long time, members of the AMA did not have to pay.
Right. And you could see those ads in Google Images. Just search the phrase "more doctors smoke Camels." There was actually a marketing campaign aimed at enabling more people to smoke because their doctors recommended it, or recommended a particular type of cigarette that was deemed perhaps more healthy. Yeah.
And Harvey W. Wiley, who was the first head of the FDA, tried fighting this. And it was a lawsuit against what was then General Mills. I don't know if it's still the same company now.
Right.
Bringing white flour over state lines.
Really?
Right, which he said was poisonous. And he took them to court on it. And
lost.
It was that political leverage that got him thrown. Actually, he won, but it took years.
Right. Right. Yeah, they just buried him in legal fees.
They buried him in legal fees, and that was the end of him. Right. And he wrote a series of books that were, for years, they were purchased by big agriculture.
Right.
And so you couldn't get them. And Roy Ali, who started the National Health Federation, printed them anyway and said, "Sue me," because he was a multimillionaire in his own right, and he could afford to take them on. He made his money coming up with electric motor controllers,
right,
to keep the motors running at rated speed. So you have the Department of Agriculture very early on. The FDA was corrupt beyond belief. EPA, but those weren't the ones that did the real bad damage. It was the general colleges, which were getting research money from the drug companies, the medical schools and the osteopathic schools. And the osteopathic schools, basically today, are just medical schools.
Right.
And they were paid off by Big Pharma. You had big agriculture, who has lots of money to be gained from GMOs, polluting our food. I believe something like 70 or 80% of all antibiotics are used on animals. So even if you consider yourself to be antibiotic free, unless you're eating grass-fed, you're not.
It's actually, there's high levels of it in the groundwater.
Yeah, sure.
From the residual antibiotics in the urine of these animals.
Yeah.
Because they're urinating outside. So it's actually right. It's been proven that there's a level of antibiotic in everyone's drinking water.
And what is an antibiotic? Basically, it's a fungus. Fungus and bacteria have been fighting, or mold, whatever, for time immemorial. Selman Waxman, who was at Rutgers when I was there and had the patent for streptomycin, which when I was a kid was very big, was finally kind of taken off the market because it caused kidney disease and hearing deficits. But he still paid for the Microbiology Institute at Rutgers, which he tried being benevolent about it. He didn't keep the money or anything.
Right.
He had been at the agricultural school at Rutgers, but that was one of the first big antibiotics. So you have the AMA, the American Dietitians, the American Diabetic Association, and finally for the pièce de résistance, print media and broadcast media got paid off by the drug companies. Try watching television and notice how few advertisements are not for the food industry or the drug industry. Thank God for the automotive industry.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd be totally bought and paid for.
Right.
So you're a voice in the wilderness, or this guy who wants, $900 or $1,000 for selling the concept of coaching people
program.
Off sugar. Yeah. Which, by the way, I have no problem with. I know a chiropractor in Jersey who charges $10,000 for it.
You do, personally?
Yeah, I don't do it, but I know
you
somebody.
You know another chiropractor.
Yes,
okay.
I know another chiropractor who charges $10,000 for that type of program. Okay. I won't for a lot of reasons, but the bottom line is, if somebody shells out $1,000 to $10,000, they're much more likely to get the memo, this stuff is going to kill you.
Right.
Because that happens to be the truth. The problem is you have the truth coming out on one side and you have all these established interests on the other.
Right. So the voice of the truth is comparatively extremely small compared to all this let's call it propaganda, because it is propaganda. And I don't want to focus too much on the politics of it, because we're going to share with you today information that can really empower you by taking control of your health back. So in the advertisement that you probably saw in the Natural Awakenings magazine this month of September, in the ad it states that we know what the number one reason is, or the number one factor contributing to America being the sickest nation in the world, sickest developed nation in the world. And what is it?
Well, it gets a little if I had to simplify it, I would say too much insulin.
Right.
But the insulin is a reaction of simple carbohydrates, which are cheap and easy, and people are consuming in huge amounts.
Right. So we're talking about, number one, sugar, mostly refined sugar.
Refined sugar, but also even sugar that
even honey. Even honey's going to kick up your insulin levels, right? And
high fructose corn syrup is probably the number one destructive.
Probably the worst. Right.
Galactose can do it also to a certain extent, which is another variation of sugar.
Right.
Certainly sucrose being a problem. Almost anything made from wheat or grains.
Okay. What's the mechanics what's the nuts and bolts mechanics that's occurring in the body when we do ingest sugar? Any form of sugar, even alcohol, right?
Sure. Alcohol is converted to sugar for all practical purposes.
Bakery products, right. Breads, cakes, rolls.
Unfortunately, even meat sometimes, if they're fed with heavy amounts of corn.
Right, which factory farm meat, most of the meat you're buying in the supermarkets, right. Those are cattle raised on corn. We're going to get actually to that. I have some interesting information about that I kind of uncovered at one point. But
which, by the way, the government subsidizes. Corn,
wheat, absolutely. No, but then there's a whole story behind this. It's very interesting because there is kind of and I don't want to seem like, we're not. This isn't us being conspiratorial.
No.
This is just, these facts are out there. If you want to read, anyone out there listening to this wants to research this. All this information's out there on the internet. You might have to dig a little bit because it's, you're not going to find it on MSN.com or Google,
my whole thing is to be empowering.
Right.
That's all I care about.
That's all I care about.
But if you find out a little bit so you can understand the data or data stripping.
Well, yeah, it helps you connect all the dots. Right?
And then you can do what's positive to improve your state. And that's what I'm about.
There is a history here.
Yes.
That involves politics and economic forces. Yeah. But again, I mean, to the average person, to the average housewife in Bergen County, husband, children, what does this mean to them? What is happening when they ingest sugar, ice cream, cakes, lollipops, bread? What is happening in the body, and why is it so detrimental? Based on some of the conversations you and I have had, sugar is by far the worst culprit as far as food that we eat as a society.
Okay, well, I don't consider sugar a food, but from what we consume.
Well, it's not. Yeah, actually, I just read that it isn't a food. It's just empty calories. It's a drug. Because it acts like a drug.
Yes.
Okay, but what is happening in the body that's so detrimental that if we all got off sugar today,
yes,
it would vastly improve the health of us as a nation and individually,
okay,
of course.
I'm going to list sugar and simple carbohydrates kind of in the same category.
Yes. Simple carbohydrates being...
Right. The first thing that would happen within a relatively short period of time is your blood glucose, the amount of sugar in your blood. Glucose is the simplest of sugar. That would go down, and within 90 days, your hemoglobin A1C would drop down. Hemoglobin A1C is how your red blood cells are literally tarnished, or they're dyed by sugar. It's what they call a caramelization reaction. It's what turns popcorn into Cracker Jacks. You heat sugar by corn, and that's what you get.
So you're coating the cells,
Yeah, you're coating the cells.
which is not good.
No, no.
What's happening when
and you can't uncoat them.
So what's the? Oh, you can't.
No,
So
the cells have to be broken down and degraded.
and then the body has to form new cells.
Yes.
Which is taxing, I would think.
Right.
Because
It's caramelization, the Maillard reaction. There's a few things. Actually, biochemists today are more likely to call it the age reaction, which is advanced glycating end products.
right, and you also mentioned in the earlier podcast that there's also no real healing going on for 7 days after we ingest sugar.
Well, it's not a matter of no healing.
Not healing, but what was it?
Your biochemistry, there is a particular ratio of calcium to phosphorus, which should be 10-4. It takes very close to 168 hours before you can drop back down to that ideal ratio. The 10 of the calcium is considered anabolic, or the building up, and the phosphorus is catabolic, or breaking down. So you want that 10-4 ratio. That's where your body belongs.
Okay.
And that's been derived by numerous people over the years. My favorite is Melvin Page, but that's a deceased dentist who ran a preventative dental practice down in Florida.
So sugar's affecting pretty much what? Every cell of the body, most cells in the body?
Well, sugar you need for energy. No question about it.
Right, but not this kind of sugar.
Small amounts you could get by, but it's not the ideal scene for it. It would be like putting super high octane gasoline in your car and never taking care of water, oil, any of the other fluids.
Right.
You're going to burn it out, and burn it out pretty quickly.
Okay.
And that's what's happening.
So this is the culprit. Sugar is the culprit behind diabetes?
Absolutely. And some new research indicates not only does it feed cancer, as we know from the work of Otto Warburg, the Nobel Prize winner, and arguably the finest biochemist of the 20th century, there's new research to indicate that it actually causes mutations that can cause cancer. And certainly epigenetically, it's a disaster.
Well,
which is the turning on and off of genes.
If it's an immunosuppressant, which it is, so I'm not surprised. Why would anybody else be? I mean, but you got to do a little bit of homework. You have to, you have to educate yourself on what's actually occurring in the body. And you said something interesting. You said eating sugar is like borrowing money from the bank.
Yes.
Because no matter how much of it you eat in a lifetime,
you pay it all back.
You have to pay it all back because there is damage that occurs.
Yes.
That has to be paid back by
your vital energies.
Okay.
And the important material aspects of your body. Thomas Seyfried is a former Yale, I believe at Boston College now, biologist. And he's written extensively cancer is a metabolic disease. And he has people with very dangerous, incurable cancers that are alive years and years after the fact.
How does he do it?
He gets them into ketosis. If the body doesn't have excess sugar, cancer can't eat. Now, cancer's been with us for a long time, but not like the scourge that it is.
Yeah. It's become a force to be reckoned with. But that's because we're giving cancer ideal environments in our body to thrive, right? So we are complicit by what we choose to eat. Also, stress levels in this society do contribute to that, and pollution, but to a much lesser extent, stress pollution. But the one thing we have control over is what we're putting into our mouths.
You would think.
But and let's a little bit of history. You're a nutritionist, you're a chiropractor, you're an acupuncturist. You've been in practice for a little over 40 years.
Yeah.
Right? I know you never advertised. This is all word of mouth clients, right, or patients. And you counsel I would assume everyone that comes in here. I mean,
Yes.
I was under your care. I was in a car accident. I've been under your care for the last year, and it's just I come in, even if I'm here for 30 in and out in 30 minutes. There's always dialogue. There's always good
Yes.
information being provided by you that's educating me beyond what I already know. And it's empowering me to take that information and put it into action, which translates into from a nutritional standpoint, avoiding certain foods and especially I think more importantly eating more of the foods that I'm supposed to be eating,
Yes.
like the steamed vegetables that I have at least once or twice a day,
Right.
which encompass 2/3 of my plate. Who does that? How can you can't even buy that out in the world. I don't know of a restaurant where I can go and get a huge plate of steamed veggies. Maybe one
The
of the Asians,
chains.
maybe one of the Asians. Yeah, but
Yes.
that's the lowest. That's
Yeah.
not organic, and it's like the
No.
lowest common denominator.
And have lots of soy in it.
Low quality food. Yeah, those soy
GMO.
sauces.
Yeah, that's
Right,
true.
right. But still, I mean, maybe Japanese. I'd have a better. But my point is that the responsibility really rests in our hands, and especially the parents out there. The health of your children rests in your hands. So if you think that sugar is this fairly harmful, wonderful little treat that you
You
can
mean
have
harmless.
once harmless.
A harmless treat.
Did I say harm?
You said harmful.
Harmless? Yes, harmless.
Yes. If the
Yes.
sugar is a harmless treat.
Right, right. Which that's what I grew up thinking. I mean,
Sure.
we always had a 2-liter bottle of Coca-Cola on our table.
Okay.
I mean, and yeah, I drank 1 or 2 glasses with pretty much every meal. But I think I fared better than most Americans because I come from a lineage of Eastern Europeans. I was born there, so my DNA isn't as let's say what would we call it, damaged.
Well, you were old enough over there before you got exposed, where
Right.
you have a relatively round head, which
Yeah,
indicates your consumption of oil-soluble vitamins.
yeah. I think I was born with this size cranium, actually.
Well, you might have been, but you had to maintain it.
Right,
And your mother had to eat properly, and you had to eat properly at least part of your growing up.
right. Yes, no, absolutely. Oh, we did. My mother cooked every night. I mean,
Okay.
McDonald's, Burger King, once in a blue moon.
But you get round heads from that. Versus the average American requires orthodontia,
Right.
wisdom teeth extraction, because our heads are too narrow, and they're too narrow because of nutritional deficiencies.
And what's happening? Okay, so what's happening with the skull and the teeth and the jaw there?
Yes.
What tell us? What is happening actually
The
with Americans, right?
Right, the typical Americans, the width of the head is shrinking, and because of that, the occlusion, which is the dental term for your bite,
Yes.
is no longer right. And you require orthodontia in order to normalize it, and then you require extractions of wisdom teeth. And some of these wisdom teeth are never extracted, and they can become impacted, and they can set you up for congestive heart failure.
Okay, what's causing that? What's specifically causing all that? This is a malformation, malformality.
Malformation. It's
Yeah.
two things at the same time. It's not enough oil-soluble vitamins. People don't consume cod liver oil liberally anymore.
No.
And they don't take in enough good animal fats, which you actually need, A, D, E, and K2.
Right.
And at the same time, when they're not taking in the good stuff, Weston A. Price said the average American was consuming twice as many twice as many minerals. The primitive people he studied were consuming twice as many minerals, 4 times the amount of water-soluble vitamins, and 10 times the amount of oil-soluble vitamins. So the great loss, of course, is the oil-soluble vitamins. And of course, the other half of that equation is too much consumption of carbohydrates, which wash it out.
Right.
So it's being what little we have isn't enough, and we're washing out the rest.
Washing out the rest by eating these empty calories that are actually
Right.
they're leaching minerals from the body in order to be out processed.
I had a new patient in today who fell 4 years ago. And she says, "Oh, I'm in pain." And I said, "Well, why did you fall?" "Oh, I don't know. So on a driveway. And I said, first of all, you didn't have enough leg strength. I said, why haven't you healed? Because your nutritional status isn't good enough. And it's just compounding. You know, what is she supposed to have, like back surgery now to complete it? It's not the answer. The answer is eating properly and correcting it. People are sick because they're not being fed right.
They're not feeding their bodies nutrition. I mean,
No, they're feeding them garbage.
Because it tastes good, because it's convenient, because this is what we've been conditioned into doing by our parents and by their grandparents prior. Would you agree that a lot of the degenerative disease we have today is the result of overconsumption of sugar?
Sure. When I say sugar and carbohydrates.
And carbohydrates,
yes,
breads,
absolutely.
and
it's directly correlated.
White rice and...
Yeah, we've gone from consuming a few pounds of sugar a year in 1740s to literally going hundreds of pounds between sugar and flour.
Okay.
And don't think brown flour is any better than white flour.
No, it's
not. It's just more rancid. It kills dogs sooner.
Yeah. So, because in the end, the grains they don't digest well.
They don't digest well, and brown grains have a higher lectins.
Right.
And that's real bad. Agnes Faye, who is at Berkeley, who killed 100 dogs were dead who took in whole wheat bread.
Right.
And I think it was 45 dogs were still alive who were on white bread.
Wow.
Yeah.
And everyone out here believes that whole wheat is much better for you than...
If you believe whole wheat's better for you, I advise you to start smoking filtered cigarettes. That must be the same as...
I'd rather go for the cigarettes than the bread. Me personally. But okay, so there's so many fallacies out here and...
It's bias and fallacy world. Because ultimately, most people are not interested in the truth.
Well, we know that.
They're interested in selling their product. They had a thing in Medscape this week that 95% of cardiologists felt they had either no nutritional education or minimal. And the funny thing was, okay, so 5% may have been okay. You don't know who that 5% are, and they may have been wrong anyway. The other half is only 20% of them followed their own advice in terms of taking in sufficient fruits and vegetables. So 80% of what we're going to for cardiological advice don't follow it themselves. Now, if I told you to get adjusted or eat well and stuff, and I didn't do it myself, why would I think you're more important than me? If I'm the doctor, why wouldn't I do it myself?
I agree.
So it's obviously not important to them.
No, it's besides fallacies and whatever, it's a world of hypocrisy as well.
We are corrupt to the bone.
To the bone.
Yes.
That's actually the name of this podcast. I coined it last night. I was like, this is going to be called, because we're going to cut everything to the bone. Right. Because there's so much extra disinformation, misinformation floating around out there that we never really cut things down to the bone. So I know you...
I'm saying every single degenerative disease.
Every single degenerative disease. Is everyone listening to this?
Is either caused by or made worse by the American diet.
Right.
No
primarily
exceptions.
Sugar, simple carbohydrates.
Yes.
Rancid oils that break down in high temperature cooking.
Right.
Right. You should be frying with, if you're doing any frying, or avocado oil or almond oil.
Or butter oil.
Or butter.
Or
just straight
coconut.
butter. Straight butter. Coconut, I think it has a lower...
No, as long as you don't cook it a second time. You don't
just one time. Yeah, I only use my oil once.
And red palm.
Yeah, but the French fries you're eating out there in the world, that's GMO soybean oil,
yes,
which breaks down at a fairly low temperature. So you're actually taking in liquid cancer,
right,
liquid free radicals that are soaked into every French fry that you're eating. So it's like it's just a delivery system for cancer.
And extra sugar with the ketchup,
right,
which is
right,
more than half sugar.
But
getting back to those oils.
Right.
Did you ever see a vegetable oil?
Out in the world?
Out in a vegetable, where you squeezed it and you got a little bit of oil. I haven't.
No, but I think it was a cheap way to produce oil, so they started producing oil that way.
Yeah, but your great grandmother,
Yes.
my great
Butter.
grandmother's, couldn't have had vegetable oil because you couldn't make it in the kitchen.
Right.
You're talking about extremely high pressures and unbelievable temperatures, or the use of petroleum solvents like
Right.
hexene,
Solvent extraction.
which is
Right.
so
Hexane.
amazingly
Oh, yeah.
toxic.
Oh, boy.
It's just unbelievable. The people would consume this. And now instead of trans or hydrogenated, they're playing some other games with oils and stuff.
Right.
Canola oil, which real name is rapeseed oil until the advertisers, like
Right.
Canadian Oil Company, has probably killed more Indian women with lung cancer from cooking it.
Right.
So unless you're cooking it somewhere else, I wouldn't even want to breathe in the fumes.
Wow.
It's that toxic. And there is no such thing as vegetable oil. It is a made-up term.
Okay. So let's. I want to do a real life scenario. The atypical sick Bergen or Passaic County resident walks into your office that's been going to doctors and specialists and has a laundry list of issues and chronic fatigue and can't sleep well and bloated, overweight by 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds. What do you do with them? Right off the bat, what are the first 5 or 6 things that they need to do?
Okay, number one.
Uh-huh.
They have to stay away from these bad foods. It's not a matter of negotiating.
Right.
Like, I'm cutting down on my sugar.
This is how to reclaim your health, right? This is
Yes.
how to become empowered. I mean, we want to feel healthy, vibrant. We want to have tons of energy so we
Right.
can work long hours so we can pay all our bills. It's the
Yes.
American way. But we're not that. We're a nation of sick people. Okay, so number one.
Cut out sugar and wheat. That is
The most important thing?
the most important thing, hands down.
Because when you're spiking your insulin, what's happening? There's serious damage being caused to the body that you're eventually going to have to pay back.
Yes.
Whether you feel that payback now, if you don't, you'll feel the ramifications of your actions at some point, and especially if you're eating excessive amounts daily, I would
Yes.
think. Okay, so get off sugar and wheat. Most important thing. What happens to people's weight when they get off sugar and wheat?
It takes it skydives lower. It drops so quick.
Yeah,
That was Atkins' whole business,
right.
and it worked.
And it worked. Right. And when I did it because I was overdosing on wheat because I was a bread junkie. And we sold our restaurant and then I had all this free time and I'm barbecuing and putting everything between slices of, or actually I'm putting everything on loaves of French and Italian bread. So get off the sugar. It's and the simple carbs, wheat. What's next?
Next thing is, it's kind of counterintuitive for the long-term correction of it. Take lots of little meals because you want to maintain your blood sugar level. You don't want to crash.
Does that work for everyone though?
For most everybody, at least initially, until you get your blood sugar under control. Lots of little meals. Now, if you want to augment that with the third thing, which kind of fits in
So
with
this
it,
is like a phase 2, right?
Yes.
This is then you don't have to do this long term.
no.
The little
No,
meals.
in fact, you don't want
so
to.
this is just a stabilizing mechanism or strategy.
Right.
Blood sugar stabilizing mechanism.
Yes.
Okay. And how long are you doing this? Like a couple months or?
Well, the third thing,
Mhm.
the third item will actually decide it for you. Take your blood sugar. Treat yourself as if you're a full diabetic because you're well on your way there anyway.
If you're eating the typical American diet.
If using the criteria that I use, that was developed by Dr. Joe Kraft, who's a medical doctor, he was an internist as well as a pathologist. Almost nobody in America who's been there their whole life is not pre-diabetic.
Interesting.
So assuming you're pre-diabetic already, what's the big deal about getting a glucose meter? I recommend the Bear because it's 10 or 15 bucks, and get cheap strips, which are about 25 cents, and read it.
It's a Bayer
Bear glucose meter.
which you can buy on Amazon.
Right, then you can go
Prime,
to,
have
you
it
can go
2
to your
days from now.
website and,
Right.
I have the article.
Okay.
Just make sure if you get the Bear Bear meter.
So I'll post a link or a URL, the web
Right,
address,
to the
web address to the article, which you'll give me
Yes.
later, so people can actually look this up.
Well,
So
the article's from your magazine.
it's actually from my magazine. Okay. Oh, that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I said everything there is to say on it.
I remember. I'll link everybody to that.
Yeah.
And then you're keeping a food log, right, as you're doing this.
Absolutely. Finding out what's spiking you.
Right, because and that would that denote that somebody has an allergy or
Absolutely.
to a specific food that they might not even be aware of.
If it spikes your blood sugar, you're probably allergic to it. And also the converse might be true. If it drops your blood sugar too fast for no good reason, you might have a reaction to it also. That's less likely, though. And people are usually more concerned about dropping their blood sugar than spiking it up. Because you can feel it when you drop it. You don't feel it when you spike it.
Right.
I've had people 400 or 500 blood sugar that were walking around until I told them maybe it's best to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So that would be the first, second, and third. Cut out the simple carbohydrates and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Eat small meals in order to maintain your blood sugar
For a while.
And the third thing is take your blood sugar. Oh my gosh!
Right.
Once you're accountable to a number, it changes everything. And the funny thing is, once that number stays low, and the number should be 84 when you're doing fasting blood sugar, and approximately an hour and a half after you eat, plus or minus half an hour, you try and find the highest amount of blood sugar should be less than 140. And once you have that under control, then you can start cutting the meals out.
Sure.
And then you get into the next one, which is fairly sophisticated and beyond what most people would buy into, which is intermittent fasting.
Right.
But you have to have your insulin under control before you consider fasting.
But nobody tells you that.
No. And once you're into intermittent fasting and you can get into regular fasting, then you can go into ketosis, which is a great way to control really serious degenerative diseases. Really making stuff that you normally wouldn't want to tackle. But medicine has no good answers for. If they tell you you have terminal cancer and there's virtually nothing they can do, what do?
You starve the cancer.
You starve the cancer. That's exactly right. And people who turn around and say, oh, so-and-so died after a valiant fight with cancer. I go, really? Did they have the valiant fight with cancer or did their doctor?
I got to tell you this story. I have my ex-wife and I have this really good friend who's, he's in his mid-60s now.
Yeah.
And about 3 years ago, he was diagnosed with, he had some predisposition to cancer. They found some cells in his liver.
Yes.
And then they put him on the interferon treatment.
Yes.
Which I think gave him the cancer, actually.
Okay.
Because he got the cancer not long after the interferon, is it?
Interferon.
Interferon? Yeah. Okay. And then he started doing some research because he didn't have complete faith in the treatments that were available for this. And what happened was it took him 6 months to actually diagnose him.
Okay.
Right? So he was going to one doctor and for this test and that test and this diagnostic. And then in the end, what he did was he found some naturopath online, actually.
Yeah.
And this naturopath did I don't know how they took the photo, but he did iridology.
Right.
And he was able to determine what some of his, deeper or all of his deeper conditions were in his body. And he said, basically, this nutritionist said that, or naturopath said, your organs are at the point where they're just kind of shutting down slowly because of, all the
right.
whatever, not taking care of himself over many years. You know, he's a business person, always on the
Yeah,
go,
sure.
grab a sandwich, cup of coffee, that kind of thing. And but what was happening was, by the time he was diagnosed, the tumor that was resident in his liver was starting to grow into the vein, which you don't have a lot of time left when that
No, that's
starts to happen.
metastasis.
Right, that's metastasis. Right. So they schedule his pinpoint radiation. I forget what it's called, the radiation
Yeah.
treatment, and then he was supposed to do chemo after that because the radiation was supposed to reduce the speed of the growth of this tumor into the vein. Um, he finds this natural path, and he goes on actually an all fruit diet.
Okay.
40 days, I think it was, something
I wouldn't
like that.
necessarily recommend fruit, but if it worked for him,
I think it was supposed to have like
yeah.
a cleansing, maybe even like an
Right.
astringent effect because he was so blocked up from
Right.
whatever his diet was over the decades. And so he does this for 45 days. He gets the flu in the middle of it. I mean, he's still working. You know, he's
Yeah.
got this diagnosis hanging over his head. And it's a true story. I mean, the guy lives in New Jersey, and you know, I'll actually probably have him on a podcast one day in the future. But what happened was after he did this 45-day fruit fast, and he was the only thing he was doing besides that were teas and soup, certain bone broths.
Okay.
Okay. Even if that, I don't, I'm not so clear on the. I think there was some. No soup, no soup, no soup. Just herbal teas and the fruit fast, right?
Okay.
So couple months later, after this or whatever, it's time. He had the radiation treatment. He's in front of his doctor. Well, actually, he walks in the office, and the doctor is holding his folder in his hand, his chart or whatever, and he's shaking his head. And this guy, my friend, is.
Figure it's over.
He's like, oh no. He's like, what is this guy gonna tell me? You know,
Yeah.
like I got 30 days to live or something. It's like, come on. He just went through this fast, which is very difficult.
Right.
You know, he never did anything like that in his life, and he had the radiation treatment, and he's working his job through all this, and he shows up, and the guy's shaking his head, and he's like, the doctor says, I don't know what happened, but you don't have a tumor anymore. He says, I can't believe this. This is not possible.
Yeah, but here's the next part.
Well, you know what's coming.
Yes.
Go ahead.
The next part is the doctor never changed his usual operating procedure. Never asked exactly what he did. Just said about how lucky he was.
Right.
And everything goes on as routine business.
Right. That it's just an anomaly.
That's
Life
right.
goes on. Right. So, and you're absolutely right. And my friend didn't offer up any information either because he knew he would have probably been laughed at.
He should have been asked.
Right. But here's what happened. Which denotes kind of how insane this whole folly has become. This is what happened. He says, well, you're scheduled for chemo on such and such a date, and I highly recommend that you make that appointment. And he's like, okay. Walks out. My friend walks out the door, never goes for the chemo.
Yeah.
And what's the point? There's no tumor. It's like, because the chemo was paid for already by the insurance company. So perhaps by him not showing up, they would have lost that revenue. I don't know. I mean, I don't do medical billing, but
Right, and I don't know what their motivation is. And I suppose an argument could be made about doing the chemo preventatively and stuff.
preventative?
Yeah,
I'm going to dump tons of toxins? Okay, an argument. Thank
An
you.
argument. I'm not saying that's what I would have done. I'm a great adherent of Robert Mendelsohn. And Robert Mendelsohn looked at things he was a medical doctor in charge of licensure for the state of Illinois. Very famous pediatrician, University of Chicago graduate, who got a very sobering view of medicine during his internship and residency, when the use of incubators who had very high oxygen blinded a lot of children. I still have some of those children as adults, as patients, with retrolental fibroplasia, which is an overgrowth of the blood vessels. And he tried reporting it to his supervisors. Eventually, a year or two later, they stopped doing 100% oxygen, which was very damaging to newborns, at least their eyes. And he turned around and he said the algorithm is wrong. He said medicine tries proving everything, tries to hide behind science.
Right.
Most of medical procedures are too complex to hide behind a simplistic if A, then B scenario.
Right.
He said the proper thing to do is something taken from business, which is called the reward to risk ratio.
Right.
When you come in my office, if I tell you to stop taking bread or stop taking sugar, have I put you at risk?
No.
No.
Not at all.
I would argue maybe minutely if you were starving to death and that little extra bread or soda or water or whatever, caused you to starve to death. But it's laughable. It's so microscopic. It's not even worthy of discussion.
Yeah.
One time, Bob Mendelsohn goes to me, what is the greatest benefit of chiropractic care? And back then I was a young chiropractor, ambitious. and I turned around proud as a peacock and I said, the great benefit of chiropractic care is it removes nerve interference so the body can express its innate intelligence. He turned around and he said, not bad, but that's not the great benefit of chiropractic care. And I said, oh, what's the great benefit? I don't get it, if not that. He said, it keeps people out of medical offices so they can't make mistakes and kill people. And I know that's an extreme position, but if you look at the British Medical Journal earlier this year, it said, I think the third or fourth largest cause of death.
In America?
In America.
Is medical...
not malpractice.
Not malpractice. But
death. Death through medicine.
Death through medicine.
Right.
Drug interactions, right?
Everything. Surgical,
botched
iatrogenic
surgeries,
diseases.
Incorrect diagnoses that lead to...
For a chronic disease, if you can handle it,
right,
without going into a medical intervention, there is nothing safe about a drug. A drug is a poison. Now, there are times when it's absolutely necessary.
Absolutely, right.
But
during critical care.
But
certain critical care, like after an accident, if you need to stabilize a person.
Or you could be on a condition and you require it the rest of your life.
Right.
But for the average person with the average condition that's suffering malnutrition should not be put on a
drugs.
poison.
Right.
In a non-emergency situation, start with something conservative. And he started his new medical foundation and whatever. And unfortunately, he died way too young. And if I told you what he died of, I don't think you'll be real happy with me, but he died of diabetes.
Yeah, but
that's, as far as I'm concerned, it was Saint Robert Mendelsohn and his 4 famous books, which Confessions of a Medical Heretic, How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor, Malpractice, How Doctors Abuse Women, and his last one was Descent in Medicine.
Wow.
And they were 4 of the greatest books ever written by one of the greatest men that ever lived. In Yiddish parlance, the highest compliment we can pay to someone is call them a mensch, a real human being.
Right.
And this guy was a human being. He'd get on an elevator and ask the elevator operator, this of course was many years ago, how their kids were doing and knew them by name. Mm-hmm. He was just a real humanitarian.
Nice.
And one of the high points of my life was whatever contact I had with him before he died.
So where are we on our list? Get off sugar and simple carbs.
Yes.
Wheat, especially.
Yes.
Number 2, number 1 sugar, number 2 wheat.
Right.
And
each small, frequent meals, at least until you get your blood sugar under control.
Right. Stabilized.
And probably pick up a meter, a glucose meter, so you could do that.
Right.
And then the last one is eventually get into intermittent fasting and possibly ketosis if that's what you need with a serious disease.
Okay.
To make sure you're secreting ketones.
Right. And you should be under the care of a professional. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
it could be a naturopath, could be a nutritionist,
could be a medical
could be a
doctor.
medical doctor, could be, but someone who's guiding you in the right
And
direction.
then the very last step.
Not just putting you through a cycle that everybody else gets put
No.
through because of whatever
And this is it.
societal conditioning. I don't know what's
And
causing
then
all
once
this.
you're in ketosis,
Right.
at least twice a week getting out of ketosis
Okay.
is the very last step. Because you want us to create a small amount of insulin that you're sensitive to.
Ah, interesting.
And that's the very last step. And of course, while you're doing that, to do strengthening exercise and everything else. And that is the bottom line. It's not that you won't die, but you won't die prematurely through suicide.
Slow suicide, that is the typical modern day American diet.
Right, we're using our spoons and forks and knives to dig graves for ourselves.
Right. So, meat and vegetables, fish and vegetables.
Yeah.
You want I mean, if you're not vegan or whatever, you want animal fats in your body.
Yes.
You want fat and cholesterol. You want
Yes.
butter.
Yes.
You want butter. You want certain cheeses that are
And it's ideal having raw
raw, right.
as much as possible,
Mhm.
raw dairy.
Yes.
It's
I buy only raw at this point. Yeah.
It's ideal having grass-fed.
Yes. Even grass-fed beef has so
Right.
what is it? Rich in I forgot. Omegas. Right? Grass-fed beef.
It's conjugated.
And we've demonized beef and pork. We've demonized
Yes.
anything but chicken, it seems like. And chicken is the way it's raised these
Yeah.
days. I have a friend who knows a guy that raises chicken out in Pennsylvania. They have a product called 48-hour chicken. You know why it's called that? Because in 48 hours, this chicken goes from a chick to a full-grown chicken because they're force-feeding it liquid nutrition,
Right.
and out the other end, it's coming out below,
Yeah.
right? And it's it's an EPA toxic Superfund site just by
Right.
the way it's set up, and but
truly a free-range chicken, a healthy
Right.
chicken. Chicken I get from a Amish. Eat worms,
right, yeah,
and my eggs are completely different.
oh yeah,
These are real foods. In terms of fish, it gets a little interesting. You want sustainable fish, you have to speak to an expert. That would be a couple of hour discussion.
right.
There are such thing as farm
But
raised.
you want
that are
real
healthy.
sustainable fish.
Right, real sustainable
right.
fish.
That's a whole nother. Right.
That would be hours.
Yeah,
and
2
beyond
hours
my-
with an expert, and you'll know where you should buy your fish.
That's about it.
But beyond all the smoke screen and all the mis and disinformation you're hearing, farm raised is now even better because of the
can be.
filters can be. If the filters of the
Yes.
technology has improved as compared to what it was initially.
Right, but it's not all farm raised.
But it's not all farm raised, right?
And you have to really depend on it. An expert.
Right.
Which I'm not going to.
Yeah, no, that's not. That's a whole nother podcast.
Right.
But could bring in Thomas for that.
Yes. He's
No, I
brilliant.
know he's I know he's gung ho. It's actually a friend of ours and patient of Dr. Lavitan. He's in the fish industry, salmon specifically. Comes from
And he's
England.
He's president of his company, and he's brilliant.
Yeah. And what you think is sustainable fish out there is really not. But
Yes.
that's a whole nother show.
Right.
And what we want to hit home now is that most of your health is in your own hands.
Right. And my version of dessert
Mhm.
is possibly twice a week having a few pieces of fruit.
Twice a week. In the morning, I would think.
Well, when you want to raise your insulin.
On an empty stomach. It doesn't digest. People don't know that it doesn't digest
Yeah.
well with other foods. You're supposed
No.
to eat fruit on an empty stomach, preferably
Because-
in the morning.
Right, because it digests so fast.
Right.
But that's your sugar fix, and you're done with it.
That's all the sugar you should be eating. Right?
That's it.
Ideally, small children, same thing. Once,
Yes.
twice, 3 times a week at the most. Some
Never
sliced
mo-
apple.
Never more than twice, and even sliced apple, I would combine it with cinnamon. You don't want to spike your insulin. And you're done.
So the cinnamon buffers a little bit? Or?
Right, and the funny thing is, once you get your insulin under control, it's amazing how little food you need. It's 1 o'clock right now.
Right.
If I don't eat until 6 o'clock tonight, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I have to tell myself if I'm going to eat 2 meals today or just one. The blood sugar's under control. I still have the energy and everything.
And I think most importantly, you're not in that addictive cycle. So
No.
you're not craving sugar carbs.
No.
And that's what happens when you're eating sugar carbs. You're
Right.
craving sugar carbs. What didn't you tell me the other day that sugar has the same action on the brain as a drug,
As cocaine,
as cocaine?
sugared water, or the sugared taste, on rats is more powerful.
Than sex
cocaine.
and cocaine.
Yes.
Which
I don't know about
it's-
sex.
No. I read that study recently.
Okay.
It might not be the same one you read, but they
Mine's
had.
Connecticut College.
Okay, I forget where I read this, but this was
Yeah.
like maybe 3-4 months ago.
Okay.
And what they did was they had a bunch of rats in a cage, male rats, and they had the eyedropper thing, whatever they called the feeder, with sugar water, cocaine water,
Right.
and then they had what are they men's
Probably female rats and
in heat.
in
In heat. And what did they all overdose on? Freaking sugar water.
Yeah. Now sometimes they actually use saccharin water, which is virtually the same, and that's a discussion for another day.
Right.
Because artificial sweeteners are as bad or worse than sugar.
Mostly worse, especially
Yeah.
when we were talking about aspartame.
Yeah, and sucralose, which
Right.
is the horrible
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. So stay away. I mean, look, it's
You have to reacclimate your mouth and tongue to stuff that's not that sweet.
you do.
You just have to.
You do. Okay, and you know what I did? Because I do have a bit, or did have a bit of a sweet tooth. And when I had to go through a complete health transformation, and not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally, all that. But the physical part of it, I was the guy who diagnosed me said you're a prime candidate for skin cancer because my colon was triple compromised. Both kidneys were compromised to some degree. One was compensating a bit for the other, and he said if it wasn't for your heart, you'd be in a world of shit because your body's not eliminating the way it should be. Because of the way you're eating, he said, if you wanna stick around for a while, get off the crap.
And here's the bottom line. Let's just say, for argument, he's totally full of beans. The guy who told you that.
Right.
Just for argument's sake. How did you suffer by following that advice?
How did I suffer by following his advice?
You didn't.
Oh my God, I have a new life.
Yes.
I mean, you know how I don't eat sugar? Because I know myself. I have a sweet tooth, so know thyself. Yes. I don't bring it into my home.
Who doesn't have a sweet tooth?
I don't bring it into my home. So the temptation is not there. I'll tell you, in the last 4 months, I told you, I had sugar once. And you know why? Because I was craving. And so I know myself, right? I quit cigarettes 4 years ago, but every once in a while, my brain puts me into this obsessive state because it remembers how good it was. But it doesn't. The cigarettes don't taste good to me anymore, and neither does the sugar so much. But I'm not that far away from ending my sugar addiction.
And
Right.
you were stressed. Almost definitely when you craved the sugar.
I'm less stressed. Right. But what I did, and I don't recommend this for everyone, but you want to be strict when you're doing this, especially with your kids too, because this is going to impact their health for the rest of their lives. But what I did was I stopped bringing sugar into the home. But when I started craving it, the obsession, I went out and I got a little bit of it, and I broke the craving. I just ate a little bit. And then I stopped thinking about it because I think it was just this kind of, my brain was saying, we want a little sugar.
The expectation was stronger than the reality.
It
Once you
wasn't.
tasted the sugar, the expectation was gone.
Oh, you know what? I was like, this is foul. It was too sweet because
that was the reality.
my mouth, my taste buds, have acclimated to less sweet and
But somebody listening to this podcast
yes.
can save themselves the trouble of going to my office, because that's what they're going to hear here.
Yeah, besides getting acupuncture and adjustments.
That's all secondary.
Right. No, we know that. Because
the most important thing, I don't care if a patient comes in, if they switch their lifestyle and they never see me again, I don't care.
And you're happy when they do that. I know you are.
Yes. It's taken care of.
Because a lot of what you're preaching, right, is just falling on deaf ears because people don't want to change. They're set in their ways. Yes. There's a social component to all this. When you're out, you don't want to seem like the odd bird that, oh no, I can't have birthday cake, I can't have pizza, I can't have this. Hey, it's as easy as, you know what, I'm on this special diet. I need to go somewhere where I can get a piece of meat and some vegetables. I mean, can you help?
Right, and someone brings in some candied stuff or whatever,
right.
And I don't want to insult them. Yeah. I tell them the truth that I'm pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
And you know what? So's everybody else.
And you know what? And nobody questions that.
That's right.
Because when I'm out eating in the world, in restaurants or whatever, I tell them I don't want sugar and something without sugar. I'm pre-diabetic. And they're, oh, okay. Nobody questions it. You don't have to go into this big spiel.
No. And that does it. And when people are drinking alcohol, seltzer or regular water with a slice of lemon or lime.
Right.
And that takes care of it. And that's it.
No alcohol.
No alcohol.
Just that?
That's all I do.
Seltzer and lime?
Seltzer and lime. That's all I drink. And that may be extreme for people, but eventually you can get into it.
Beer is not good, huh?
Sorry.
I'm Czech. I come from the Czech Republic. Beer drinking capital of the world per capita.
But beer in its own way is as bad as fructose.
I'm actually drinking less and less and less and less beer. You know why? I think because my body's acclimating and it's sending signals that it just, we don't like.
Right, but the beer belly is the same as the soda belly, and it's a toxic
wheat belly.
Liver.
Yeah.
It's the liver itself gets too much fat, and you get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is actually becoming bigger than alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Right.
And it can kill you, and it will kill you. You see, the liver can only do one thing at a time. If it's detoxifying sugar, that's all it can do. Then it can't detoxify anything else.
Ugh.
So there you have it.
Wow. So be kind to your body.
Right. I have nothing else to sell of value. If they buy this concept and it can help somebody, God bless you.
Okay, so to kick off this war on sugar, and that's what this is. This is my personal war on sugar. This is Dr. Steve Labatan's personal war on sugar, which he's been in the trenches for the last 40 years trying to influence or influencing, and with certain people you can only try because they don't want to hear it. They actually they sometimes get nasty because their excuse is, oh well, my medical doctor didn't tell me to stop eating sugar. Oh well, if that's your excuse, have a nice day. Enjoy. Right, but bottom line is we would all be a lot healthier if we got off the sugar. What I'm willing to do is, if anyone goes on this particular diet, you could do this at home. You don't have to spend $900 for the coaching thing that we just saw on mindvalley.com. You don't have to come to Dr. Labatan's office in Teaneck once a week or twice or three times or whatever. You can actually get off all sugars, and then you have to also go through your cabinets, read all your labels, and make sure that there's no sugar in the ingredients, which could be also disguised by other ingredient names like, I don't know, corn sweetener, that's another I think that's another podcast. I was going to get into the whole corn thing and why the entire food industry has changed to, we used to do 100% cane sugar. Now we're doing something like 75 to 80% high fructose corn syrup in all food ingredients, and there's some reasons for that.
Oh, sure there is. Well, you know what Coke did, which was brilliant.
What?
When they came up with their new Coke.
Yes.
And then nobody liked it, and
right.
They went back to the classic Coke, and they skipped cane sugar to fructose in the new classic Coke.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
so
right.
It was brilliant.
Right.
But that's where it's at. If you cut the sugar out, you cut the grains out.
Sugar, grains, soda, beer, alcohol.
All that stuff, you're going to be shocked.
Just get yourself a nice vape pen and,
It would be better than any drug you could possibly take.
Yeah. We could all go from sugar to marijuana. I mean, sugar and alcohol to marijuana, I think we'll be a much happier nation. But that's coming.
Okay, I'm not going there.
That's coming. You're too much of an industrious person to be smoking marijuana. So, but that's not necessarily Dr. Labatan's
Endorsement.
endorsement, and not necessarily mine either. But we like to have fun here, so we crack jokes sometimes. It's been Jerry Hochek from Natural Awakenings Magazine and PlanetJersey.com here with Dr. Steve Lavitan from A Sterling Clinic, asterlingclinic.com in lovely Teaneck, New Jersey. Signing off, and thanks for listening.